Hello. The purpose for this brief presentation is to get you acquainted with the concept of analyzing learners, performing learner analysis, and why we do it. Have you ever had to drive a car that belonged to somebody else, a car that you weren't used to driving? Perhaps you were used to driving an automatic transmission and this was the first time you had driven a stick shift, or there was something else with the car that was different than what you're used to. So in order for the car to operate well, you had to change some things that you did. You had to accommodate. Knowing your learners is a lot like knowing your car. For your car, its characteristics and its condition determine how far you can go or how far you can't go. Your learners are a lot like that. The characteristics and condition of your learners can also influence how far your training can go or perhaps not go. And you may need to make accommodations depending on the characteristics of your learners. Now, not all learners are the same. Different kinds of learners will often require different kinds of instruction. For example, if you were teaching some technology to a group of executives and to their secretaries, you would probably have to spend more time with the executives because the secretaries probably already know the technology better because they use it on a day-to-day basis, whereas the executives usually have the secretaries do it for them. So in this case, the executives would probably need more training. Some of the characteristics that we use to perform a learner analysis are physiological. These are characteristics that the learners really can't change about themselves. These include age, gender, the condition of their health, and their race and ethnicity. Depending on these characteristics, there are some things that you may need to change about the way your training is structured. If you need to make some physical accommodations, if you need to change the different motivation factors because people of different ages might be motivated by different things. You also would want to make sure that your training is not culturally biased or offensive. Social characteristics of your learners could include their maturity, their culture, their socioeconomic status, their relationships, and their affiliations. You may need to make accommodations on how you structure your training, whether it's individualized, whether it's group training, whether you're training people of of a similar um, a similar position in the corporation or grouping them by different positions. You want to take these things into account when you're designing your training. So if you know these characteristics about your learners, it will help you design better training. Academic and skill characteristics. These could include education level, test scores, grade point average, reading level, and attention span. So you may need to modify the way that you deliver the instructions or the materials that you use in the instruction depending on the level of your learners. Affective characteristics. These include interest and motivation, self-confidence, locus of control, which means does the learner perceive that their situation is one in which they control, or if things that happen to them are largely due to what other people do. Also, anxiety. So depending on how the learners feel about the instruction, you may need to do some things different as far as your training goes. Now, some of the changes that you may, or modifications that you need to make in your training, depending on the characteristics of your learners, would include how long your training is, the pace of the training, how quickly or how slowly you go through it, the reading level of the materials, whether you need to define certain terms or whether the audience would have enough experience to already know these terms, whether you need to include different vocabulary because of the education or maybe the fact that your learners don't speak English as their first language. Your characteristics would also influence the kinds of examples that you provide. the amount of practice that you give learners as you're training them, the type of feedback that you give them as a result of their practice, how much control you give the learners over their pace and what they're learning, their content, and also the structure of the learning itself, whether you're doing a face-to-face training, whether it's going to be online, whether it's blended, whether it's field-based training, whether you're training in the actual office or learning environment. All of these implications for design can be changed and should be changed according to the characteristics of your learners. Now, performing a learner analysis is not particularly difficult to do. What most people do is they create a table with learner characteristics on one side and then ideas for modifying the instruction on the other side. That is what we will have you do in this week's lesson. So learner analysis allows you to design training that will be the most effective for your learners, regardless of who those learners are. If you look at their characteristics first, and then you modify the training according to their characteristics, chances are you have a better chance of having more effective training. See you in cyberspace.